So if you've done some tree planting in the rainy season, you'll find out that a lot of those trees that really thrive when you first put them in just don't survive once the weather dries out. There are a lot of reasons for this. One of the common problems is we tend to plant trees imagining what their final shape is going to be. But they aren't in their final shape. They're small, they're vulnerable, and in a normal system, they'd have a lot more shelter from the elements when they're still small and vulnerable. So things like the sabernut, which is also called bombax, it's a very hardy little tree, and it can actually quite often survive fully exposed. But what we've done here is when we put it in during the rains, we've surrounded it with a bunch of succulent calincos, and that just means the base of it is a little bit more humid. It's got a lot more protection from pests that might damage it if it was small, and it's just a lot more likely to make it through without drying out and dying. The other thing you can do is you can start with trees which are a lot hardier. So things like the speckboom, which is also called a jade bush, it is nearly native. It's widespread in southern and eastern Africa, and that's going to settle really well into fairly open areas where it's not got other trees to protect it. And that means your first round of planting is going to be hardy succulents like this, and then once those are established, they create a more sheltered environment where you can start planting more useful native and fruiting trees. So last year I did plant a whole bunch of trees. I actually planted at least one for every day of the year. And you can't really see many of the trees. Most of what you're seeing here is the dracaenas which are coming up around them. A lot of them are still water dependent, so I still come around once a week with a little bit of water for them. But the trees are inside these mounds of companion plants, which are keeping them safe, keeping them protected from the elements. And so although they're not shooting up, a lot of them still need support. You can see inside that, even tender little trees like this loquat are actually growing perfectly fine because they have that protection. So although they don't get heavily watered, they just get a weekly litre of water on very well drained soil, they can still come up because they have that extra protection. So I actually documented all 365 days of tree planting on my YouTube channel to show you which ones do and don't live, and not everything lived. I'm going to be straight and honest with that. Some trees, it turns out, were not suitable for this, but for a lot of trees, this style of companion planting has proved very effective for me, even planting at really non-ideal times of year. So the trees I chose are a huge mix. So there's a lot of native trees because I do like planting native trees. A lot of them turn out hardier. We've got a lovely wild pear there, which is fantastic for pollinators. Not an edible fruit tree, but native and really nice tree to have. There's also a lot of fruit trees. And there's a few trees involved which are just because I wanted them. So for example, I planted mapani, which is indigenous, but not to this part of Zambia, but it is a tree I have always wanted to have around because it's a really beautiful, really fantastic tree. So it's a huge mix and had some very surprising levels of success with some of the things I wasn't expecting to thrive, and then some of the things I was expecting to do well didn't cope nearly as well as I'd hoped. But yeah, it's a very varied selection and hopefully it's enjoyable.